which was nominated for an Emmy. So thank you all for being here. We're really excited to have you and to dive into your backgrounds and then really break into this conversation on the new Black cultural renaissance that is going on today. Back to you, Felicia.
Well, thank you so much for that. So before we get started, I would like to direct the first question to my brother, Fab Five Freddy, to get a historical reference dating back to the Renaissance from the 14th century to the 17th century and the role Black people played. So, Fab, can you take that?
Oh, sure. I'd love to. Thanks so much, Felicia, for these incredible weekly gatherings. So this is kind of a little continuation to what I spoke about last week about this amazing opportunity I got to host a film for the BBC where we looked at the little discussed history of Black folks featured in significant works of Renaissance art. So the film is called A Fresh Guide to Florence with Fab Five Freddy. You could find this on the BBC iPlayer, and if you guys have a VPN, you can switch your location to London and watch this film. So a part of this history lesson for me was seeing that, the interesting factoid about all of this was in the 14th, 15th century, there was no concept of this color differentiation that we're locked into now. There was no white, there was no Black. It was only like ethnicities and where you were from, what country, and the Germans had beef with the French and the Italians, et cetera, et cetera. That didn't all begin until the African slave trade developed in the 16th century. So once again, there were Black folks featured in significant Renaissance works that were amazing, obviously normal folks that were living there. And that was pretty much a revelation. But, the other thing that was pretty amazing to me, two of the factors that stood out was, number one, learning about Giorgio Vasari. And this is the person that literally invents the idea of the Renaissance. He wrote a book called The Lives of the Artists, which was the first time that anybody differentiated the difference between Leonardo, Giotto, Michelangelo, et cetera, in this comprehensive book. He was a painter and an architect himself. In fact, he was the architect of the Uffizi, one of the great museums in Florence. And so that was fascinating that the Renaissance starts with this individual, this concept, which we're going to get into later, the fact that we could be on the verge of a new Renaissance right now, Black Renaissance, similar, hopefully, to what happened with Black folks migrated from the South, from the Caribbean, settled in Harlem, and really got it popping with what we know of as the Harlem Renaissance. But one of the amazing things for me, when I was a kid coming up, the first thing I really decided that I wanted to be as a little boy was an architect. And this happened when I learned that every room we're in, somebody first draws that. And that was just like an amazing revelation to me. So I started as a little boy studying, reading about Frank Lloyd Wright, the whole 9 yards, and just really was consumed with that. But that wasn't the direction I would take. And I did all these things in the culture, hip hop, et cetera. In some ways, I feel like I've done a little bit of architecting regarding that. But, about 10 years ago at a talk at Museum of Modern Art, I went to hear David Adjaye speak about his work, this young Black architect that was making significant moves. And it really inspired the hell out of me because I'm like, wow. And I understand that most of the architecture in America comes from different places in Europe, Greece, and, Spanish, and, all these amazing influences, which are inspire the buildings that we live in. But hearing David talk about taking inspirations from objects and cultural significant elements from the continent of Africa and those things inspiring buildings that he has made and was making. He was the Smithsonian was under construction at that time. It just was so exciting. And then to meet him and for him to be aware of the few things that I've done was just super cool. So I just want to I want David to jump in right away. Once again, David is on the line from Ghana. And I just want David to just share with us a little bit of your process and how I remember going through the Smithsonian in DC, and there was an African sculpture, a crown, if I'm not mistaken, which I think inspired the shape of the building. And then if I'm not mistaken, African basket weave inspired the metal shape, the frame around the building. Can you just speak to us, David, about your process bringing that African energy into your work?
Thanks, Fab. Yeah, no. I mean, I'm very interested in really decolonizing the sort of the knowledge bases that we all draw from, and that, we are, as you said, since the 15th century have been obsessed with Western history, and that seemed to be the only sort of voice that we were sort of told we could draw from. And, pre that Renaissance, what's very clear is that the knowledge that had really built the world, that, pre the Renaissance, was really essentially coming from the continent of Africa. And pre-colonization, which really destroyed a lot of the infrastructure, the built infrastructure of the continent, but actually, stole, brutally kind of grabbed the kind of great artifacts. They are in the West. They are in America and in Europe and in parts of the Middle East and Asia. So these beautiful, powerful objects were sent all over the world, and thank God they were not destroyed. And in a way, for me, they have the evidence of the great heritage that the continent had before the colonial sort of erasure. And I just feel that if we're in this world where we are talking about the kind of the multiplicity of voices, and a sort of a modern world where production is really achieved at its best through the kind of greatest amount of knowledge, the continent's kind of contribution to who we are, especially as Black people, and who we are in the world now. The classical period, the Renaissance, the classical period is all predated by the civilizations of Egypt that were completely predated by the civilizations of Kemet and southern Africa. So you can't understand the Renaissance without understanding Africa. And in a way, for me, when I was working on the mall, I felt that you couldn't understand what the mall really stood for with its Neo-Grecian sort of modernist architecture without understanding the roots of it, which was that the continent really birthed it, birthed this classical language. And the irony of it all for me was the beauty of seeing Washington's monument, which is an obelisk, but the obelisk is actually one of the kind of great columns of the Temple of Karnak of Egypt, which was reappropriated by the Greeks and the Romans continually as a really powerful object. They took it from Egypt, they placed it in their squares because they were just in awe of the sort of incredible architecture. So I wanted a place, when we were talking about the design of the museum, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, I wanted to really acknowledge the roots of this narrative going far back, and also to acknowledge it to our immediate sort of, if I can say immediate, like the last 1,000 years of our ancestors, to the Kingdom of Benin, which I think in the forest region of the continent where most Americans, African Americans come from, the forest region, the Benin Kingdom was probably the most profound, sort of Edo people was probably the most profound community in that time. And they really kind of affected all the kingdoms that went right through to what we know as Senegal right now and South. They are, the Benin people are in Ghana. There are many types of people all over the continent. And their shrines and their palaces were famed in the world. They cast the incredible bronzes of the 11th century that, was astonishing to people who gathered it. And, I was lucky enough to be in Benin recently to one of the last foundries, and just seeing the incredible skill that's still there. And the few sort of master bronze casters that are there is just mind-blowing what they're able to do. So I wanted to really activate that would have been the experience of, our ancestors, 500 years ago, this incredible artistic tradition. And that if we were talking about the sort of, generations after that, to somehow put into the collective memory of the generations that are now and searching for our future, that we needed to go back and look at this magnificence and go forward. So yes, it's inspired by that caryatid, which is really one of the figures that's in the inner sanctum of a shrine house, one of the Orisha shrine houses of the Edo people. And I wanted to bring that forward, as that would be something that the kings would know, the royal families would know, and would be open to citizens at certain special moments. And it would be a really powerful aesthetic. So just wanting to kind of understand those aesthetics and bringing those into the context is really important. With the skin of the building, it was deeply inspired by really actually the labor of African Americans, and this idea that slavery wasn't just about cotton picking, but it was about the kind of infrastructure and the intelligence of Black people, bridge building, house building, irrigation systems, the infrastructure of Africans to build what is now the kind of basis of America was extensive. And that is now very, very clear. So the architecture of the South, the cast iron buildings, the beautiful buildings of New Orleans and Charleston, etc., this technology of smelting iron, and which was prevalent, in kingdoms of Benin and mastered. It's ironic for me that these slaves were able to kind of create this incredible ironwork architecture for their colonial masters. And so I want to acknowledge that. And we took one of the kind of, pieces that we knew was made by a slave and really kind of remade a sort of digital drawing of that, which is the facade of the building. So when you're looking at the building, you're looking at, the work of somebody from several hundred years ago, a Black master blacksmith who created that pattern, and we are celebrating that pattern now. So I hope that helps to give you a way in which I think, and that happens throughout all levels of my work, whether I'm working on cultural buildings or where I'm working on something like the Studio Museum, which I'm excited about right now, which is on site for the Studio Museum, which Thelma is the director of. In that, drawing from the inspiration of Harlem and its lessons and the communities of color and how they use the city, their spirituality, the stoop, the commonality, the civic qualities of the urban environment, etc., are all woven into the way in which the building will sort of manifest itself as a new form of art space in Harlem. I hope that helps.
Yeah.
That helps a lot. I just want to jump in for a second, David, because that's amazing, because I've also understood that it was a lot of Black labor that worked on the building of the Capitol building and the White House, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's also this gentleman named Benjamin Banneker, this Black tobacco farmer who the presidents couldn't ignore. I'm wondering if any research about him came up while you were working on that amazing building in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely. I mean, Benjamin and a whole cast of characters about really the kind of extraordinary history of the White House, the extraordinary history of making of the mall, the incredible Black labor that was involved in it. And, really the imagining of, what Washington was, and, how it was such an important space for the beginnings of Black emancipation, but also, it was a site, that our site was more or less on a slave sort of selling pen, sort of table. And that was kind of shocking to hear. But the idea that actually what we see as Washington now is really completely constructed through Black labor and Black lens, and where the site was a canal that was really about the kind of using boats from the Potomac to bring the stones and the timber, etc., to build the city that Black folk were doing. So anyway, but jump in if that helps a little bit.
Absolutely, thank you so much. That was fascinating.
Let's see if Thelma wants to chime in before we move on. Thelma?
Well, I just want to say that, what we've just heard from David really makes us understand how important thinking about the built spaces when we think about culture, right? That it is not this sort of anonymous authorship, but the vision of how we build buildings, how we build cities, how we build communities is so important. And that's what is so important about David's vision, and that it has significantly transformed our vision of architecture and its potential.
Thank you, Thelma. Darnell?
I feel like we just got a master's level degree tutorial from David on that. That was a lot of history dropped and a lot of great notes taken. Thank you,
I
David.
know I had a bunch of follow-up questions, but he crushed it. So I'm keeping him in my mouth. So let's move on.
Thank you.
I want to jump in before we dive into the this conversation about the new Black cultural renaissance. Wanted to just dive into each one of our guests' backgrounds a bit, and I want to start with you, Masan. We were talking earlier. I think it's fascinating that you're known now as being a photographer, but it's something that you've kind of took on in a more professional capacity in the last few years of your life, and would love to just hear your background and your journey to getting to that point and turning something that was a hobby into a profession. I know that you had a whole life before you got to that point, so would love to just hear some of that background.
Great, thank you for asking, Donnell. I did only pick up a camera just over 3 years ago. But I would say my eye was very busy observing from a childhood. Being in a situation where I was the only black kid in school in the 80s in England, in the middle of nowhere. I needed to find solace and feel that I belonged, and I found that in the pages of books and the notes of songs and in the visual imagery of a lot of black storytelling, particularly for me, Moneta Sleek Jr., who was the first black photographer to win the Pulitzer and the staff photographer for Ebony magazine. And I had never seen black voices, even in my schooling, in the history classes. I didn't have any of that. And then I started looking back with my own culture in Nigeria, people like Solomon Osage-Olonge, and then Moa Meme, who came from Kenya, and the images that they took before, of course, discovering the work of Gordon Parks. So my eye was training itself for a while without realizing. But what held me back, I would say, is what many of us suffer from, which is imposter syndrome and not necessarily thinking our voice matters. And it wasn't up until 3 years ago that my wife said, listen, I'm sick and tired of listening to you talk about all these extraordinary artists. Maybe it's time you start being a custodian of truth and, capture our history with your lens. So I picked up the camera, YouTube tutorials, self-taught. I'm very dyslexic, so I struggle with anything beyond very visual learning, and started shooting. What changed for me was 2020. After the murder of George Floyd, I didn't necessarily know what to do. And again, my wife said I should look to my camera. So I picked it up and I went to the protests, not knowing whether I would see 1 or 2 people or thousands. And what ended up happening is, in London, from a London point of view, my images struck a chord online very quickly, with the editor-in-chief of British Vogue, Edward Enningful, seeing those images and commissioning me to shoot the September issue of British Vogue. And in doing that, making me the first black man in the 104-year history of British Vogue to shoot anything. And on that point, it's a real testament to what happens when you have diverse voices that have purpose and influence. Because as good as my pictures may be, it needed somebody that had that lived experience to throw the net further afield, to give me a chance of having my voice heard with that British Vogue cover. Donnell.
Wow, that's incredible. And Edward is, in full disclosure, I represent Edward, and he's also a friend, and I know he's a dear friend of yours and a number of other people in the chat. And I think one of the in the Clubhouse rather, and I think one of the things so great about him is what you highlighted, is that he is in this position, but he's used that position to elevate voices and creatives who may not necessarily have had that opportunity, but very much so possess the talent. And I think you are an example of that. So thank you for sharing that story.
My pleasure.
I want to pivot to Camila Forbes and bring her into the conversation. Camila, I think you got one of the coolest jobs in the world, because you get to be the executive producer of the iconic Apollo Theater, which is, if I don't think that there is a more iconic stage in Black culture than the Apollo, and you get to be a custodian of that history, and also bringing it into the present, into the future. But beyond that, you're also an incredible producer and director in your own right. I just would love to if you could give us a little bit of background of growing up in Chicago, to getting to the point where you're the executive producer of the Apollo, and also kind of following your dreams on producing theater and now directing TV and film.
Well, also, I want to add one thing about her, which I thought was so cool. You were the person who collaborated on the Nas and the National Symphony Orchestra. And that was just amazing. That was such an iconic moment.
Yeah. Well, thank you. One, pleasure to be here. And so look, I grew up in Chicago, Illinois. To Caribbean parents who, immersed me in culture, really taught me the value of culture, and I saw it all around me. Maybe didn't encourage, being an artistic leader as a career, because they thought that, legal engineer, a teacher would probably be more practical. But either way, I saw the power of seeing yourself reflected, your story reflected, your narrative reflected at a very young age with the works that they, by them taking me to theater, but also me immersing myself into theater. I was a hip hop baby. I'm a child of hip hop generation. And so, the power of the voice is something that sat very much and squarely as a part of my own personal aesthetic and personal lexicon. I then went to Howard University to study theater. And there fell in love with language and spoken language, but then also saw that, even within my own theater and canon and lexicon of the classics that I was studying, whether it was Douglas Turner Ward or Adrian Kennedy, much of my culture, generational culture, was not represented. So started to experiment with this fusion hybrid theater. And at that point in time, we were calling it, we named ourselves and named our movement Hip Hop Theater. And I was very, it was always an interest about how do we find culture and always consistently being at the forefront of culture, but making culture relevant. And that led me to not only start the Hip Hop Theater Festival, but also work with artists that were creating and naming themselves in a new language. And then at that point in time, it was spoken word artists. That led me to start to produce and work with Stan Lathan on Deaf Poetry Jam, of which I was a producer for 7 seasons. And just the power of the word and the power of language really rang itself true. And it's so interesting that you brought up the Nas at the Kennedy Center, because that's one of a dream for me. It was the 20th anniversary of Illmatic, and I was curating a hip hop festival at the Kennedy Center. I know just those 2 words at the time, which was 2012, seems odd, Kennedy Center and hip hop. But I was curating a festival, and of course, who's more iconic than Nas, and an ability to build this work, Nas with his, the Illmatic album, in front of a symphony orchestra of a 90-piece players was something that felt like a dream. It felt larger than life. And working on that project, that was one of the first hip hop artists who had collaborated with the National Orchestra. There's been several collaborations since, but it was interesting because I think it was a real, building that work was challenging, and not from Nas's part, but also I think sort of the translation point of building something that is very, rooted within Black culture, rooted within, hip hop culture, building it within this very white power structure, not the institution itself as a Kennedy Center alone, but also within this white cultural power structures of symphony orchestra. And so there were a lot of, translation points of back and forth, and really began to really see the challenges of building our work in spaces where, and institutions and within institutions where our language is not their first language. So, being at the Apollo Theater is, it is a dream because it is home. We are a Black cultural institution, a Black-led institution that for the last 87 years have been celebrating, uplifting our culture across the board, not only nationally, not only in Harlem, but also internationally. And the beauty of that is, and I think the inverse of my experience at KC is that, there is no translation point for language, right? Like Black culture, Black language is who we are. And it is our mission moving our institution from not only an institution of reverence, but a cultural institution of relevance. And that's where we stand today. I think that there's something really powerful about, I love that Thelma is also on the call, about Black institutions. And, I always think of the quote of Langston Hughes that we build our temples for tomorrow, strong as we know how, and we stand on top of the mountain, free within ourselves. And that's, as Black cultural leaders, what we do every day. We are building these institutions for revolutions and renaissances, not just for today, but truly for tomorrow. So it's important that we're constantly looking forward. And that's what I like to do in my work. It's all about sort of this constant forward looking and always trying to find our ways to propel culture and propel people forward.
Well, I want to encourage people in the room to Google you and take a look at your work. It's amazing. So please, y'all, go back and Google. And her interviews are amazing. And that Nas event was incredible. Like, I can watch that over and over again. You did such an incredible job with that.
And if y'all have HBO or HBO Max, I highly recommend you checking out Between the World and Me, which Camila directed. It's really inspiring and couldn't be more relevant. So
I want to jump in because I know we have David only for a short time because he's in Ghana. But David, I want to ask like a futuristic question for you. And we don't always have you in the clubhouse, so just bear with me. So if you are not limited by any restraints, budget, external opinions, or even gravity, right? What type of building would you design? I want to hear this because your work is incredible. So if you had no restraints, what would it look like?
I'm always interested in, things that really bring the people together. I think for me, the most radical act in the diaspora and, on the continent is this act of gathering. I think the act of gathering is the Renaissance and the act of gathering is the revolution. So I'm interested in those temples in all their forms, whether they're spiritual, whether they're just communicative, whether they're just places of dialogue. They are the instruments that, I think any project that tries to destroy culture disseminates and breaks down. So, my dream is always wherever that space is, that's what I'm always tracking, and that's what I'm always interested in making. I'm being a bit esoteric with you, Felicia, but that's, in a way, what I mean is that it takes a group to make that building, because I'm not sort of interested in making a sculpture, but I'm interested in like a collective of people kind of making that space that is the space of the gathering of communities in whatever form they are, whether they're on the planet or off the planet, to kind of really kind of create a resistance and a continuity of that idea of civilization that we all are in love with.
Beautifully stated, and it sounds like you're talking about Clubhouse.
Really?
This new house that we're
The
all
virtual.
in. I mean, we're all together.
This is the Renaissance.
This is the Renaissance. Well, also, before we move on with more questions, and Stephanie, we definitely want to get you in. I want to see if Terry or Ime or Chloe have any questions for David or Gayle, or Thelma or Marvin. Are there any questions out there, or Michael, for David?
I do. This is Terry. I do. David, I'm the biggest fan. Hello. I've had the honor of being of actually shopping in the Oswald Boateng store that you designed.
Great.
And also that's one of your smaller, beautiful places. But then also when I took my whole family to the African American Museum, and let me tell you, my life changed forever. Can you please just share with us, what goes through your mind when you are commissioned to do one of these outstanding buildings? I mean, it's to me, I'm on TV, I do this kind of thing, but when I see what you do, it would overwhelm me to know that this stuff, the things that you build are going to last, centuries beyond, your own existence. It's kind of like, how do you handle that kind of responsibility? It's gigantic. What is the first thing that goes through your head?
I mean, thank you, Terry. It's really wonderful to be engaging with you. For me, architecture, it's a crazy thing. It's like a bit like a doctor. You study for like 8 to 10 years to get to your license, and you're just immersed. And what you're doing in that time, if you're really obsessed with this thing, is that you're shifting your mind to be able to understand every fragment of the built environment and how it comes together. So you get to the point where I sleep, dream, eat, think through how the world is made, and that's just my kind of existence. So, the thousands of bolts and connections and structures are just kind of my reality, and the way in which a doctor looks at your body and all the kind of incredible organs and just knows what they're doing. So I can't even tell you anymore how I even think, because it's so automatic for me. I've kind of trained my entire fiber to just be completely responsive to the nature of making spaces. But then, when I'm trying to gain inspiration, when I was a younger architect, it was trying to understand what it is that I was actually referencing and what was important to me was such a struggle. How do you understand the relevance of the things that you're looking at, and whether they're going to matter to your peers, and and when you're on the outlier and you're not part of the mainstream, that's even more complicated. What are your references, and do they matter to building the culture and civilization that we're talking about? And for me, diving deeper and deeper past the knowledge bases that are the common knowledge bases. The kind of problems that we have in the world right now is that we have a very limited knowledge pool because of the way in which dominant sort of culture works. And we need to expand that and make it much more polyphonous, much more generous, much more open, so that we can actually kind of reference things in a much more easy way. I mean, I sort of hope that generations after us are able to just understand knowledge in a very equal way and to use it very powerfully. So my work is not only just making things, but also creating archives, creating, bodies of knowledge. I'm writing a lot. I'm doing a lot of research. I did the first book that documented every city on the continent of Africa. I went to every single city for 10 years during the beginning of my career and photographed the cities, just because most people, and most Black people, had no idea. And I'm working on a big project right now, which is supported by the Ford Foundation, where I'm going to all 29 islands of the Caribbean and documenting the urban built environments, just so that the knowledge that we have about ourselves isn't just limited, but expansive and useful to our generations of people.
David, I am truly in awe. I mean, the confidence and the belief in yourself to be able to make these pieces, man. What can I say? This is so inspirational that it lets me know I got a lot of work to do.
But we have another architect in the room. Let me let Jeremiah in. He's actually my architect. Jeremiah.
Hi, everybody. And Sir David, it's an honor. It's actually funny because just yesterday I was doing a career day for my oldest, who's in first grade. And I actually referenced you, and I used the slide of you for that class. So I'm kind of mad at Felicia for not giving me the heads up here. But real quick, I really wanted to ask you, everybody's kind of like, the projection of the future is that technology is going to save us, right? We're going to go to Mars and we're going to do all this kind of stuff. And I'm wondering, for example, like Akon City, I kind of wanted to know your thoughts on that. Is that a place of, like you were referring to earlier, like an act of gathering because of, strong imagery from like the movie Black Panther with Wakanda? I just kind of want to get your thoughts on that.
I think that it's sorry, Jeremiah, and it's a real pleasure to meet you. I think that what we're going to see is an explosion of lots of imaginations about the possibilities of Black space and Black creation, Black authorship. And I think it's all valid, and it's going to come from, either popular culture. The movie Wakanda is a sort of blend of highlights of the kind of epitome of, the sort of civilizations of the continent, but sort of through the lens of the sort of set designer. And, it's amazing how that sort of sparked such a powerful imagination in the Black community. And, that was just one lens of looking at it. There are so many other sort of opportunities, and I think it just goes deep because it's just not been tapped into for simply hundreds of years. So I think that we're going to be excited about lots of imagery like that. For me, the issue, and one of the reasons I moved back to the continent for me is that I want to really be absolutely part of the construction of the artifacts of the continent. And I finally, wanted to kind of fulfill a dream of just being on the continent, but also being able to work all over the world from the continent. So for me, that is a powerful place. So I'm steeped in the kind of research and the work here, but I'm able to use it in any part of the world, and to show its relevance, not just to also Black civilization, but to just humanity. That it's actually, we are part of. We're not just a sort of ghetto. We are the foundational sort of basin of the kind of creation of the kind of population of the planet, and the knowledge base of the continent is just fundamental. It's in everybody's DNA. It's kind of in if there is one collective memory on the planet, it is the Black experience in every civilization. There are Black people all over the planet, from India, China, Australia, Alaska. We went everywhere. So somehow I think that there's a collective memory of who we are, and everyone, as we say, everyone is an African. And so, for me, what does that mean, and what is that knowledge is very, very important now as we move into the 21st century. And yes, there are, people talk about technology. Technology is incredibly important because now that knowledge is not just limited to the elite or those who know or those who are in a certain group. Look at what Clubhouse is doing. Anyone can come into this knowledge base and this gathering and be radicalized with their own thinking, and to find references in their own thinking, and to start to create their own renaissance. It's half of the problem is just knowing where to look, to understand what to look at, and to kind of have the confidence to realize that actually this arena is actually really important, and that can actually stimulate a ton of creativity and a ton of opportunity the world hasn't seen.
I got a quick question for you, David. I've been to that amazing African American Museum in Washington. Can you tell me, should one start from the top and work their way down? Or because I found that to be the best way, because you get to see all the things, African Americans did in entertainment and sports. And then you get into the very, very heavy stuff. And then you come out and it's kind of, but talk to me about, if you can briefly, what your thought process was, with that moving through the building.
Yeah, so the thinking was that if you do that building, you realize that it's unlike any other building, because essentially I wanted it to be like a sort of tree, really, that it had roots deep in the earth, and then it's this pillar that comes up, and then you climb into the canopy and the filigree if you're a childlike state, and you're overlooking the city in the sort of branches of the trees, seeing things. And I use that as a metaphor because depending on how you want to see it, from the light to the darkness or from the darkness to the light, you're able to kind of figure it. I think if you're going for the first time, I would recommend that you go into the roots, that you go down, and then you rise into the light, because you sort of hopefully when you finish, when you get those panoramic views at the top, you're really kind of inspired, even though it's been a heavy journey. But I think when you're going back after you've done it once, starting from the top and going sideways and going down a little bit is a really cool way to do it. And then, you can deep dive into the roots of it whenever you kind of want to look at something specific that it might be intriguing to you. How's that as an answer?
Thank you. Help from the architect. I love it. Thanks, David.
Darnell, let's see if we have any quick, Marvin, are there any questions from the audience?
Hey, Felicia. We were wondering from any of the panelists, in their respective fields, can they name who their creative ancestors are? This is a conversation about Renaissance, so we're wondering who they're bringing forward with them. So who are their creative ancestors?
Would love to start with Stephanie if you wanted to go first on that.
Perfect.
Hi there. I am having such a good time in this conversation. Thank you so much
Welcome,
for
Stephanie.
having me. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Oh my God, there's so many great filmmakers. From Maya Angelou to, Kathleen Collins to Sidney Poitier. I mean, there's a rich history really to build upon. And for me, a girl from New Orleans who grew up in LA, who just loved books and movies. When I when I got pregnant right out of school, right out of Cal Arts, I was a dancer at Cal Arts. The only thing I really knew how to do was read. And then I found there was a job called reading. And I thought, bingo, that's for me. And my first job was at AA, reading books first and then screenplays. And that literally led to, the next job up at the totem pole, which I didn't even know about, but turned out being a creative executive at a studio. And the first real script that I read that I thought needed to be made was Boys in the Hood. And so John Singleton was really my first teacher, because he taught me the importance of the auteur. He taught me the value of the Black gaze. He taught me how to protect the artist, how to champion the artist, how to fight for the artist, and really just sort of sent me on my way to just do that over and over again. So we lost a good one with him last year, but I think the work that he left behind, and not only the work that he left behind, but the incredible amount of people who he championed himself, was just phenomenal. Just so many people that he mentored. So that's my little story to contribute to this renaissance. And I've been doing it for 30 years, and God willing, I'll do it for as long as I can.
Stephanie, and we'll go around the horn to David and Camila and Masan on this question, but I wanted to follow up on that. I think you talking about how you went from being a reader at CAA in the I think back in the Ovitz days, and then on to becoming an executive, and your first real script that you championed was Boys in the Hood, which is just iconic in not only Black culture, but I think American culture. I feel like the 90s was this really, kind of golden area of Black culture in general. Depending on who you talk to, I'm a 90s kid, so I'll ride for the 90s all day long. But the golden age of hip hop, the golden age of Black film and TV, and you worked on so many of those amazing movies, from Poetic Justice to Higher Learning to and so on. What has changed in the industry? Because one of the things that happened is that in the 90s you had all these incredible Black music, film, and TV, from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, et cetera, and then you hit a period of time at the end of the 90s and the early aughts where those things all just kind of went away. And it lasted for a while, and it probably wasn't until the last 10 years or less where you started to see a reemergence of a more eclectic mix of content from Black creatives. What have you seen in that kind of period of time? What was it like in the early 90s and the Boys in the Hood time, trying to get content made, and you're also doing it now, and what happened in between? I would love to just hear kind of your journey throughout that process.
It's so interesting because in the 90s, there were so many, even though there were no real Black executives, not that many, there was so much Black content that was being made, being developed, being released. The sale of DVDs really supported that, because they were always saying our movies didn't travel because they never paid for our movies to travel. But they could make their money back through the sale of DVDs. And then DVDs went away, and so did all the movies. The big difference, though, I think, is so many of those movies from the 90s were movies that really felt more akin to things that when I say they, the white gays wanted to see. Really, they were gangster movies. There was a lot of comedies. In the Renaissance now, we have so many different voices that are taking center stage, which is so exciting. I mean, from Ava to Lena to Justin Simeon to just all, so Barry and Ryan and everybody, Gina, everybody has a voice, and their voice is distinctive, it's unique, it's nuanced. It does not play into any of the stereotypes that Hollywood has sort of trucked in for 100 years. So this is definitely a renaissance. It was worth the wait. And even I, had to find a different way to make a living, because I couldn't get those movies made, So I ran the LA Film Festival and tried to, in my 5 years there, really bring a level of diversity and inclusivity to the festival that hadn't been there before. Because guess what? Everybody who was there, nobody was there of color, And so it's really about the gatekeepers. And even today, this is still an issue. This is a huge issue throughout the industry, that the entertainment industry is one of the least diverse industries we have in America, which is crazy because we set the culture.
It made me think about, I have to say it, back in the 90s, Robert Townsend's Hollywood Shuffle.
Indeed.
But my question is, with streaming and technology, hasn't that democratized the on-ramp in terms of filmmaking? You got YouTube, you have Amazon, you have all these streaming services now. Has that made a difference? Uh-oh, we lost Stephanie. So,
Stephanie,
there
you
we
want to
go.
jump in on that?
Yeah, I was saying the streaming services are great because, number one, we do travel around the world now, and you have to pay for marketing and distribution to travel around the world now, because the streaming services are doing it for you. I made a movie called Juanita a couple of years ago with the Queen, Alfred Woodard, and the biggest market was Brazil. She's a huge star in Brazil. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at the data, even the streaming services are not as diverse as they can be. It's a minuscule amount of work compared to the rest, compared to the white directors who get a shot over and over again. It seems like it's better, and maybe it is a little bit because there's a few more places, but the fact of the matter is, there's a long way to go.
Agreed.
Danielle?
Yeah. So look, I think that technology is it's kind of an interesting conversation on the discoverability of talent, right? So streaming services aside, right? Those are distribution, platforms that help get content out. But when it comes to creators who may have not been able to, been recognized or seen through the normal channels, using things like YouTube and places where self-generated content can be put up, it's kind of democratized. Technology and social media has kind of democratized the discovery of talent, and it's been kind of interesting to see. I mean, we represent Issa Rae, who's someone who kind of came up, through like YouTube and creating videos in that platform, which then caught on. And I don't know if 15 years ago that would have happened. So there have been some advances in technology to help with the discoverability of creatives that from all over the world who may not have been discovered otherwise. But I do want to move on that question of that was asked earlier about the kind of creative inspirations for each of you. Masan, I would love to. You mentioned Gordon Parks a bit earlier. I'm sure he's going to be your reference point, but would love to go back to you on this question and see if there's anything further you want to add.
Sure. I think from a Nigerian British point of view, I really struggled finding enough photographers that looked like they had the same lived experience, or I could at least relate. But they were there, There are British photographers that maybe many people here haven't heard of who really should have been the Gordon Parks of their generation. People like Neil Kenlock and Charlie Phillips, and it's utterly heartbreaking to me that they didn't get the recognition, that a Cecil Beaton or Norman Parkinson received for obvious reasons. So a big part of what I'm doing is, Charlie Phillips is definitely still with us, is making sure I can shine a light on his archive, on his work. He was there at the first Notting Hill Carnival, and his images there are priceless, and a national treasure at the very least for what it means for the Black British experience. And then for me personally, seeing Jamel Shabazz's work, Anthony Barbosa's work, it really inspired me to see what could be done in street photography and editorial work. And those are the people whose shoulders I'm doing my very best to climb on.
All right. Thank you. I want to bring in Ime. I think Ime might have a question or something to add on this topic.
I mean, I'll take us back to the technology one. I was going to jump in on that one, Darnell.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's just been really interesting to hear this conversation, and my role as a tech executive, just to think about how, when I think about the role that we have to play for so many of the creatives that we're hearing from right now, it really is both that technology is an enabler. And you talked about this, giving people voice, but then also an amplifier. And so I think a little bit of the Netflix conversation that we were just having for, what undoubtedly should be a renaissance. And, from my perspective, I tend to think about this thing in two folds, both as an industry, what's our responsibility, but then also from a product perspective. On the industry side, I forget who it was that mentioned it. I think it might have been Stephanie, but you're so real, when you're not just Netflix, it's all the big tech companies right now. And, it really is about participation. How do we get more of our folks in our community, access to the quintessential kind of work, wages, and wealth, right? On the work and the wages side, there's 13% of us in the United States, forget about, the billions of us around the world. But, in the US, we're only 3% of the tech workers right now. And, this is an industry that saw expansion, right, and market cap growth over the course of 2020, despite all the economic hard turns that hit our community. So we have to be participating in it. And then on the wealth side, I've heard a bunch of folks in this room before talk about, it's about ownership, it's about equity, both at the retail level and giving people access to markets, but then also, where there is Black wealth right now, making sure that they have access to tech equity, right, and tech ownership. And I think it's a pretty important piece of, what a lot of folks, at this table are doing right now. But then I think about, Misan talks about, purpose and influence, and it's hard for me not to feel connected as a also fellow Nigerian. But this is really about folks that have access to the resources that are building and designing these products, right? We need more folks in this industry, an industry that has an unfortunate history of leaving our community behind, with a seat at the table, thinking about these products and designing these products that are giving people unique power and giving, amplification to voices in brand new, kind of qualitatively different ways. But then also, challenging and designing new systems of power that historically haven't been designed for us. So I'm pretty excited about the industry's role in being a layer of service, of infrastructure, to give voice to people like Camila, and I see Chloe on here with what she's doing with dance, and artists and curators, Thelma, what you're doing right now, and David, and photography, to really just thrive on these platforms. And last but not least, Darnell, you were talking about creators, and there are a wide range of creator tools right now that I just kind of put into this bucket of economic opportunity that hasn't existed before. And, I had some folks, I think a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about NFTs and non-fungible tokens and artists that are creating and selling kind of unique pieces these days. So that falls in kind of Thelma and David's world. We've had conversations about crypto and kind of how that can enable kind of new wealth with some folks that have been around this table.
Sorry,
So,
I'm having trouble here.
sorry. So that's just, I wanted to jump in and just, sorry about that. Siri's going crazy, right? Technology
Siri's
going
got-
crazy right now. It's listening to
Siri's
us.
got a question. Siri's
Well,
got a
We
question.
love that glitch. That was the realness of it all.
Well,
Exactly.
Amy, why don't you take us back? What was your journey like in technology? You are from
Thank you.
Nigeria, you went
Yes.
to Yale. But why don't you give us a little bit of color on your background?
Yeah, I'm least, I don't know if I'm the least interesting person up on stage right now, but like the quick 2 sentences for sure. Two Nigerian immigrants found their way to Kansas in the 70s. They had me, my brother, and my sister. I was born in Kansas, but raised in Greensboro, North Carolina. So grew up, feeling very, very Nigerian, but part of the Black community, but operating in white spaces in Greensboro, North Carolina. Lucky enough to be introduced to technology at an early age. Both my parents, found a way to get a Commodore 64 in the in the house to let me and my siblings tinker around with it. But then on the flip side, I think I realized this in retrospect. My mom taught at North Carolina A&T, so an HBCU. So my summers and my days after school were spent on, A&T's campus surrounded by Black engineers and physicists and astrophysicists and, folks that were just, who were immersed in technology and who looked like me. But, ended up going up north to Yale and studied comp sci and electrical engineering. And then made my way to IBM. I think people were talking about who are your ancestors or these folks aren't ancestors, so I'm gonna apologize, I'm gonna take that word back, but just people who inspired you. But, when I was graduating, met a gentleman named Rod Atkins, a gentleman named Mark Dean, who were really senior executives at IBM. And if you know anything about Mark Dean, talk about some of the untold stories, or hopefully his story gets told more of just, Black engineers and Black talent who, really helped, shape something as simple as the hard drive and really change the industry that we're all now participating in. But I got to, essentially make my way to IBM, get mentored underneath them for a few years as an engineer, and then did a little bit of corporate strategy. But a decade ago, well, maybe now 15 years ago, made my way to Silicon Valley and, have been working in consumer tech for the last, 10, almost 11 years and really, really focused on, what I was alluding to earlier, which is like how to design products and build products that give people power in new ways and, amplify voices who have historically not been amplified. And, that's kind of my journey a little bit.
And you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
We go way,
Felicia.
way, way back. Go ahead,
Felicia,
Chloe.
may I hop
Yes.
in? Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to share that regarding the question about ancestry, I'm actually a child of the brilliant minds and artists of the Harlem Renaissance. Growing up in DC, these incredible artists like the Nicholas Brothers, Norma Miller, Frankie Manning came and taught us young kids in DC, in the inner city, tap dance and swing dancing. And it's thanks to artists like Debbie Allen and Gregory Hines who ushered them in and taught us about the legends of the 20s and the 30s. And, at the time we had, you're a kid, you just admire the gifts that are being shared with you. But, we weren't fully aware of the impact, the global impact and cultural impact that they had on the world. But what I've learned throughout my journey is that dance was the African language of dance, which you see throughout the entire diaspora through tap dance, swinging, hip hop, jazz, Afro-Cuban, etc., is all rooted in the necessity for freedom and the necessity to have a voice. And so it's so incredible when I'm looking at dance 100 years later to see how the combination of musical artists like Beyonce, shout out Miss Tina, who's always been so kind to all of the dancers. Beyonce has used her platform to elevate Black dance, and again, from a diaspora standpoint. And it's beautiful to reclaim the strength and power of our voices and to be able to celebrate those of the past as we push forward into the future and utilize dance as activism, and that we are no longer waiting for institutions to validate our art and claim it as classic art, but rather we're understanding, again, through the collective memory that David was speaking about, that we are regal and that our art is part of the DNA of the world.
I wish I can show a video of you dancing. Can folks Google you and check out your work? Like,
yes,
it's just
please.
incredible.
Thank you. My company is called Syncopated Ladies. We're an all-female African-American tap dancing company celebrating the art of tap dance and passing it on to future generations.
Emmy nominated. Keep going.
And I'm an Emmy-nominated choreographer. I choreographed The Late Late Show with James Corden and Black Lady Sketch Show. And thank you, Ime and Facebook, because Beyonce was able to share our work because of Facebook. And so again, this technology is what is giving strength and power to the next generations, and amplifying the voices of, not just myself, but all of my colleagues who are just making the world better through their voice and their lens.
Thank you, Chloe. So I want to jump in. I want to round out the question about kind of creative motivations and inspirations, and want to take the question to Camila and then finish off with David, and then we're going to move into the next part of our conversation.
Yeah. So I guess talking about, ancestors inspiring, I mean, a lot of the folks that were named, but for me, I take inspiration from, so, folks like, yes, the Maya Angelou's, but also the writers, the scribes, the Toni Morrisons, the Audre Lordes, but also, I think of Bessie Smith. I think of Ida B. Wells. I think of Vinette Carroll, one of the first Black women to direct on Broadway in the 70s, was also child of Caribbean parents as well. Lorraine Hansberry, most recent ancestor, Mama Cicely Tyson. These are the shoulders that I stand on, and that my work works in tribute to, but also, the people who inspire me also are my mentors. One of my mentors is Mr. Stan Lathan. And, he, and one of the things that I think is just so powerful about what he's done, and what he continues to do, and what he's done for so long in Hollywood, was, one of the first Black directors in Hollywood, but really open doors, physically, like literally open doors. I mean, I've run into so many directors, their first Black directors, their first call is to Stan. To get the lay of the land, and he so willingly does that, and has done that, for decades. And so I think there's always been this spirit and culture of mentorship and building of community, that he has done, that becomes infectious, and I think community begets community, and that is a mantra I think that he completely perpetuates, but also something, watching him work, he unapologetically claims Black spaces, on a TV set where, it would not necessarily completely Black, but he made it so, because he claimed it as a Black space. And that's something that has been so incredibly powerful. And now, as I see, as we invoke, all of the new creatives coming up now, whether it's the Lenas or the Isas and Ryans and Barrys of the world, we're all walking in paths led by, folks like Stan. So I got to big him up in this call.
I thought Stan was in the room. I'm looking for him right now. Miss Tina, is Stan in the room? I'll continue to look.
I saw him, Felicia. I saw him too.
Yeah. Where is he?
You're right. You saw him.
I saw him for a second. He should.
I'm gonna look for him. So I just saw him a minute ago.
He's paved the way for so many.
Darnell, do you see Stan in the room?
I'm going to use my new knowledge of how to search and figure it out.
Yeah, I don't see him.
Yeah.
Like he's always in the room. He probably just stepped out. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Darnell. I'll continue looking for him.
Yeah, no worries. I wanted to just round out this question with David on who his kind of mentors and those who inspired him were, and then we're gonna move on to the next part of the conversation.
Okay, you want to give it to David?
Hey, can you hear me? I'm having suddenly a little bit of trouble with my line.
There we go.
Can you hear me, Darren?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm some of the kind of great people that were important to me. I mean, a woman that I've now become very familiar with in terms of her work, who I sadly didn't meet, is an incredible woman called Norma Skaralek, who was probably the first African-American, she was the first African-American fellow of the AIA, the sort of registered Black architect with her own firm. She built the LAX Terminal 1 with, a local architect when she's not kind of credited for. She built the Tokyo embassy for the US with Cesar Pelli, and everybody says it's Cesar Pelli's building, but she was very instrumental in it. And she's this profound sort of person that I have so much love for. There's an architect called Julian Abel, who another African-American architect, who built the library, the Great Library at Harvard, that kids use and think it's kind of done by a white architect probably, and it's really one of the signature buildings in Harvard, and he's the author. Then there's obviously Paul Williams, who's really the great master of the 20th century with his houses for Frank Sinatra and all these people, and all the housing he built and in LA, and I've also built in at LAX, that sort of flying saucer architecture that's sort of in the middle of LAX that you kind of always want to go to, and I hope they will refurbish it and make it available. So these are some of the greats, but immediately also two great patrons that really allowed me to really shine. Max Bond, who's an incredible African American architect, who was part of the team that when we went for the Smithsonian, he was like the sort of giant, the elder statesman in our team, and he was the first person who invited me to America to talk about my work when nobody even knew about me, and Thelma Golden was there at that time, and that's when we sort of started our sort of long journey together. And he introduced me to Phil Freelon, who became the architect of record for the Smithsonian project, and really became a sort of important, my elder brother, who made sure that I could do my job and sort of get the ball to the touchline. So these are like great people that I'm indebted to and so grateful for, and some of the heroes that I love in our world.
Yeah, I was reading how your brother Emmanuel played a very large, it was a driving force behind how you approach architecture.
Yeah, no, I mean, I recently let that out and it's now there. But yes, my sort of interest in getting into the built environment comes from a direct experience of, my youngest brother is mentally and physically handicapped, and I grew up with disability. And I just was horrified by the sort of, my first sort of consciousness about our built environment was how horrific it was for people of disability. And, it was because I was, helping my parents and my brother go into spaces and through the back door and through, lifting him up through stairs and things like that. And I vowed that I wanted to make a better world at that time. And it started off with disability, and I quickly understood that the issue was so huge, and that it was about the empowerment of communities, etc. So that's when it sort of got full swing. So there is a kind of subtext always about accessibility of all in my work, but it's really focused about the knowledge and empowerment of our communities in the mainstream.
Thank you, David.
That was beautiful, David.
I'm going to.
Go ahead.
Can I be allowed to jump off? Because
yes,
it's 2 a.m.
Yes, David.
We're so thrilled that we got you.
Yes.
You guys, let's show David some love. Thank you
Yes.
for joining.
Thank you,
Thank
David.
you.
Thank you.
And thanks, David Ajay, live from Ghana. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you, David.
when the pandemic
Thank
is
you.
over, we got to have you at the barbecue, David.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, I
Bye-bye.
can't.
Peace. Bye-bye.
And you need to host
Bye-bye.
us in Ghana too.
Yeah.
For sure. Accra
Yeah.
next year, baby.
Yeah, for real.
So Darnell, you're next.
Yeah, no, I wanted to move on. Look, I think the topic of our conversation today is, about the new Black Renaissance, and I want to pose this question to Stephanie, Camila, and Masan, and then anybody else who wants to in the room who wants to kind of chime in and answer it. Is like, on that topic, what does the new Black Renaissance mean to you? What does that phrase mean to you? And then also, for your particular medium, whether it be film or TV or photography or whatever, how have you seen your particular medium change or evolve over the last few years, and where do you see it going in the future? And let's start with Masan.
Yeah, very good.
What it means to me is the ability to scale empathy and education. because the generations that have come before us never had the collective voice that the internet has gifted us. That's a real big difference. Look at us all together now, with David in Ghana, me in London, and many of you in North America having a seemingly intimate conversation. And that is really the gift of the information superhighway for us, for this moment. If you look at my images, when, and I hate the phrase viral, but when they started to really travel on the internet, Martin Luther King III used one of my images to make a big statement following the death of George Floyd. And this was just truly extraordinary to me, that somebody that obviously I have no access to and didn't know, and him and his family are such a big part of this story, is able to somehow find my work and use it to keep the message going. So it reminded me that this gift of the internet can keep the importance of education really, really alive. It also democratizes opportunity, in the sense of you can now have a classroom that never really ends. And David can, and any of the people on in this room now can share knowledge freely to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. So this is a different kind of renaissance, because it has the scale of the internet. And many people criticize the internet, and I've called it myself the weaponization of mediocrity, when you curate it wrongly. But if it's curated by our voices, telling our story, our past, our present, and hopefully we can forge a stronger future with this great gift of scale.
Thank you, Masan.
Love that.
Yeah. I want to pause quickly because Camila, you were giving a big shout out to Stan Lathan. We brought him up into the room. So Stan, I wanted to know if you heard yourself receiving your flowers, because Camila was giving you a huge shout out.
You got to unmic, Stan.
Stan, unmute, baby.
You got to unmute. We want to hear your voice.
There you go, Stan. What's good? It's Fab Five. What up, Stan?
What's up, Fab Five? Haven't talked to you in a long time.
I know it's been too long, baby. Yo, they done threw a whole florist on top of you, baby. They loving you. And
yeah, well, I love them. That's why. It's mutual. It's funny because whatever I didn't hear all of Camila's talk about me, but I'll tell you, the one thing I can say about her is that she carried me on her shoulders through those 2 years. She was the best assistant. And it wasn't even an assistant, she was an associate. And she's always had to give creatively. And she always has been able to communicate with artists, especially actors, amazingly. So I found her, she kind of inspired me. So I'm kind of pleased to know that, she was having a good time.
Great. Thank you, Stan.
Of course,
and
learned so much, Stan, and learned so much. Again, unapologetic. What I was saying, Stan, is how you claim unapologetic Black spaces. And I've seen you do that repeatedly on any set that you are leading and conducting. And I think it's so incredibly inspiring and inspirational. It was inspirational for me, just directing this most recent film, claiming that is an unapologetic Black space. And for all of the storytellers, that are coming up now, you've really paved that way. To really stand into your own voice, and lead powerfully. So that's what I was saying earlier.
Well, thank you. I'm blushing.
So, Fab, before we shut it down, do you have a question?
Not really. I was listening up until just before Marguerite came running for me to tell me that I should be on.
Well, we're thrilled to have you on. Thanks for joining.
Right, and it's good to see and hear Stephanie. And,
love you, Stan.
Love you, and I have a few other friends on today. So it's good, and I'm happy to have been, shouted out. So I'm gonna say good night.
Thank you, Stan.
Thanks, Stan.
Yep.
But by the way, someone who's been a little quiet, and I'm about to call her out. Gayle, you haven't really spoken much today. Do you have any questions for our guests?
No, I wanted to say something to David, but I could see he was getting late because I felt the way Terry felt about that museum. And I was wondering in Washington, because I've never seen anything like it. The texture, the feeling, I had a visceral reaction. I wonder if he feels pressure to top himself. I think that's a good question for everyone on the panel. When you do something that's so amazing, because Masan, I marvel at that picture that you took of Harry and Meghan. I still don't know how you did it. I know you said an iPad, but I know you were there in LA and you're in London. I'm still trying to figure out how you did that. And it's gotten such acclaim. Do you now feel, anybody on the panel, that you've got to top yourself? Do you have self-imposed pressure?
Great question. Masan?
Well, my whole existence is laced with self-doubt, and I think with the mental health ramifications of the year we've all had, 2020, COVID, and of course the open wounds that have come out even more post the murder of George Floyd. I would say that I always have immense struggles with this, and I've learnt to harness it as a superpower, Gayle, because in the very depths
like that.
of self-doubt, I always seem to find this slither of light that helps me build a ladder to tell the story that I was meant to tell. I strongly believe every image that I take finds me, and I'm very, very comfortable to carry that burden of image poetry with light, even when my own self-doubt sometimes makes me feel that I don't deserve it. I always pull myself back into the light.
I'm going to remember that, self-doubt as a superpower. I'm writing that down. That's great.
Stephanie, do you want to jump in on that question too?
I just follow my heart. I think that's what this new Renaissance is really about. It's like having our authentic say without having to worry about it. You know what I mean? Just like not having to conform to anything other than really what we're feeling now. And that's what I see in so many of the artists who are working today, being able to tell our own history without other people telling our history. That's what's really exciting to me. And just moving into the future without having to be excellent, even though we always are, but just being us. To me, that's a real renaissance. Just being able to work from a heart-centered place.
I love that. That's beautiful. Shaka's in the room. Shaka, do you want to jump in?
Shaka Senghor, step up, baby.
What up, Fab? Hey, Felicia.
What up?
What's up, Gayle? That was a great question, Gayle, as always.
Hey, Shaka.
I feel all the pressure in the world right now. So I actually just finished up my second major project, finishing up a book, and coming off the success of the last one. I definitely have had these moments where I felt that doubt creep in, but as my son said, I think it's a superpower, because it really forces you to be intentional about what it is you're doing, and it really just forced me to kind of step back and think about my journey as a writer and what this next level means for me. This conversation has been so beautiful, just hearing about all the inspirations. And one of the things I've been doing lately is just kind of going back to my why. Why did I choose, of all things, the path of a writer? This kind of torturous madness, creativity, this artistry of using words to really talk about, real experiences and things that come from like my darkest moments. But being able to find the beauty in that, is really just been, inspiring and challenging and scary and exciting and all those things. But I think that one of the things that I've been able to do to balance that out is just really go through the process with people who are, just honest and transparent and intentional, and just sharing bits and pieces of what I'm working on to get, that collaborative feedback. So it's been a blessing, but definitely some nervousness around it. But I feel really good about all the nerves.
We can't wait to read it, Shaka. You always do great work, my man.
Thanks, Darnell, man. You've been doing a great job with this moderation. It's a really good panel.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Well, look, we I know it's getting late, especially for Masan, where it's 2:26 in the AM in London.
Darnell, I
So,
just wanted to just add one thing that I feel really important to just share very quickly, and it's because so many of us are having this moment of reflection at home, hopefully taking a bird's eye view on who we are and who we would like to be. I just, wanted to say this, especially to the people in the audience that are listening, that I'm a living, sort of breathing example of what it means to take that road less traveled, because I think there's so many constructs in society, especially culturally with Black folk, where it can be difficult to follow that inner child, to follow that voice of creativity that lives within you. And that can manifest itself in many different ways. And I just wanted to say that, right now is that moment to really listen to that voice, because we need all of our voices more than we've ever needed that before. And we are capable of amplifying these voices at scale. So if anyone's listening and is thinking of taking a different path from whatever career that they're in, or a new hobby even, for God's sake, please do it. The only failure in life is not to try. Thank you very much.
Oh, that was beautiful.
that's it.
Before we shut down, can we bring in Thelma? Because everything she said, I love. Thelma, do you have a minute to join us before we shut it down?
Sure, Felicia, certainly. Well, this has been so amazing, and I think Gayle's question is so important. And I believe that for those of us on this panel who perhaps are not artists or creatives ourselves, but work with artists and creatives, know that creativity is a very particular genius, which always strives for something new, something different, something better, so that it really does create what we all see as the innovation. This imagining becomes the innovation that we see in the world. It's why so many of us get so much inspiration from creative people, because they help us imagine in ways that we couldn't possibly do without their vision walking so far out ahead of us and creating a path.
Thank you, Thelma.
Thank you, Thelma.
I want to close. This the last question, and we're going to close on this, but I'm going to close on a happy note. I mean, not that this conversation has been sad, but I want to specifically focus on a happy note. But I think oftentimes when we talk about the Black experience, it's in relation to the struggle. But there's obviously a tremendous amount of joy in our experience. And I want to know from each of our guests, and then anyone else who wants to chime in. But first, for Camila, Stephanie, and Masan, how do you allow joy to play a role in your craft? And I would love to start with Stephanie on that.
Joy is so important. I seek it. I live it. This last year has been so challenging, but I found a way to just be happy in being home, being reading, developing, watching movies. I had my first grandchild was born over the pandemic. Working with my kids who are both in the business. Loving my husband who's working in theater and on Broadway. It's I just chase the joy all the time, because it's just makes me happy, and it's a good way to wake up in the morning.
Camila?
Yeah, Stephanie, you just got me so inspired. I feel the same. Joy sits at the center of all that I do, whether it is creating space, visioning possibilities for Black culture to thrive. Joy, even in the adaptation for Between the World and Me, which we had a really hard and difficult year as Black people globally, with George Floyd and with Breonna Taylor, and knowing that this work was to be a response for the racial injustices that we have been living under in this country for the last 400 years. But it was really important to find ways to tell the story through a lens of joy and love and care, through our imagery, through the lighting, to make Black people sound and feel and as beautiful as possible, almost like a family picture album, was really sort of the mission and the vision around building that film. So joy sits at the crux of it all for me in my creativity, in my art. When we're walking that dark path, which is creating work. It is a dark and lonely path, but it always is searching for that piece of joy and that piece of light, which sits at the end.
Thank you. Masan, take us home.
I look for joy in what I see as celestial in nature. And where I find that kind of power is in my two daughters, who are both under 3. Life hasn't gotten hold of them yet. And there is a purity in how they see the world that I'm learning from every day. I see joy in my dog. Few creatures have had a relationship with Homo sapiens as much as a dog, and I feel that he knows me as well as anyone. If anything, he doesn't believe the hype and keeps me grounded. And finally, I see joy in nature, specifically trees. There's a wisdom to trees that helps me always find, steady my sails when there are stormy weathers ahead and look to the horizon. Those are my 3 pillars. Thank you.
Can we bring in Fab real quick before we shut it down?
Oh yeah, I just want to say this has been so moving, so amazing. So happy to have David Ajay live from Ghana. That was special for me in this amazing Clubhouse dinner party thing that we do. And I just want to close by saying, one of the things that I felt that hip hop clearly put on the map in a huge way is the idea of the remix. And, it made me think about, how the remix is at the core of the entire creative process for me. It's all built on something, inspired by something, like redoing it, remaking it. And the word Renaissance actually means like a rebirth, a revival of something, which is what Giorgio Vasari, who invented the concept of the Renaissance and invented the idea of art history, and then Black folks who came up from the oppression of the South and whatever, got it popping in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, that Harlem Renaissance. And coming out of this pandemic and the incredible hardship that we've lived through is the perfect opportunity to really get a Renaissance going right now. And on the Black side of things, for sure. So that's what's up. Bet on Black, y'all. Clubhouse.
Darnell, you want to shut it down?
I do. Thank you, Felicia, for giving us this platform on a weekly basis. I just want to give a shout out to Felicia because she has done this every Saturday during the pandemic. And the amount of time that it takes to put all of these together and to think through all of these conversations for weeks after weeks after weeks, and you crush it every week. So thank you, Felicia, for building this community for us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shout out to sis.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks, sis. Thank you, Felicia.
Shout out to Fab, who always brings insight and energy. And I want to give a thank you to our guest tonight, Sir David Ajay, to Stephanie Elaine, to Camila Forbes, and to Masan Harriman. Thank you guys for contributing your thoughts, your story, your experiences. I think that we're living in I think the journey and the Black experience, especially to what we contribute to culture, is really seeing a renaissance, and to hear the experience from all of you who are kind of leading that and are so inspiring to all of us. Thank you for contributing, and it was an exciting conversation. I'm glad we were able to do this, and it's a great way to spend our Saturday night.
Amazing.
Nice
Thank
job.
you so
Thank you so much.
much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining,
Thank
and
you.
stay safe until
Thank
next
you.
Saturday.
And everybody.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Hey,
Bye.
Jules,
Felicia.
take care, Jules.
Peace,
Good night,
Yeah,
everybody.
conversation. Very enlightening.
Thank you, Jules. Thanks for joining. Thank you, Ime and Darnell and
Of
Chloe
course.
and Fab.
Thanks, Felicia.
Marvin,
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thelma.
Felicia.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Thank you,
Felicia. Good night.
Felicia. Thank you,
We'll talk
Yeah,
Felicia.
soon.
thanks everybody. This was amazing. Good looks.
Bye,
Everybody
Autumn.
on the ground.
Autumn, thank you so much. Keep up the good work, Autumn. I'm a big fan. Bye-bye, everyone. And stay safe. Bye, Nate. Bye, Miss Tina. Take care, Jules. Goodbye, everyone.